Welcome to the Counselling Armchair, hosted by the counselling team at RMIT University. This podcast aims to help you manage your university life so you can be at your best. We'll be sharing with you tips on student life here and ways to enhance your mental well-being.
Welcome back, everyone. Well, it's that time of the year where many of us are gearing up for assessments, deadlines, and even exams. I can imagine some of us are going through some stress and anxiety with all this on our plate. In this episode, Liz and I will be talking about assessment anxiety. So welcome back, Liz. Great to have you here today.
Oh, thanks so much, Yvonne. It's great to be back here with you on the podcast. Very exciting.
It is very exciting. So we've got a few episodes up now and we're ready to go and talk about what is assessment anxiety, eh?
Yes, that's a good place to start. Do
you want to tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, look, I mean, assessment anxiety can sort of take the shape in many ways. Very typically, and as most people would probably, it would resonate with most people, is that it's feeling super stressed. It's, maybe feeling sick, maybe feeling like your mind's racing, maybe feeling like you can't concentrate, you can't remember things, you might be having very physical symptoms, or it might be more sort of like cognitive, what we call cognitive symptoms and sort of memory impairment. But the point is that assessment anxiety, and when we use that sort of term, we're talking about the sort of anxiety that stops you from performing and demonstrating what you know.
Yeah, so it stops us from performing or doing things that we've kind of, rehearsed or role played or learnt or, try to remember.
Absolutely. It's that thing of like looking at a question on an exam paper and going, I have no idea. I actually have no idea. And then that is terrifying because, you are under pressure to produce something, and the more pressure that you feel to produce something, the less you can actually do it. And that's when you can go into a little bit of a panic, at that point in time. And of course, the more you get into a panic situation, the less able you are to produce what you need to produce.
Does it last like a while? I guess I was also thinking, as you said, some of these symptoms and or signs sound a little bit like a panicky moments of panic. So can they last, like, is it in the moment or does it last for several days? I guess I was also thinking in the context of some of us feel quite anxious or stressed out leading up to something like an assessment or exam or due date or deadline. And then some of us actually feel that anxiety during the assessment itself, like especially if it's a test, right? And really, do people feel one or the other? Do people feel both? Does it last heaps long? Can I expect to kind of maybe go away a little bit type of thing?
Yeah, good question. And look, I think the answer is really that it's possible to feel both of those things or maybe just one of those things. So, certainly the lead up to the exam, what we might call the pre-assessment anxiety, that can start anywhere from when you start to realise it's getting close now. What that amount of days is different for different people. It might be just the day before, it might be up to the week before. It's that anticipation of like you're thinking about what's it going to be like, am I going to be able to do this? And you might start to notice things like, not sleeping so well, being preoccupied with worrying about it. And then maybe some of those physical signs as well, like feeling like your tummy gets a bit upset or, you start feeling hot and sweaty at moments when you're thinking about it. So that's that sort of lead up anxiety. And then within the exam itself, you can also get that. And that's what we describe more of like, you see the question on the paper and you think, I have no idea what that is, even though I know I literally read that this morning or yesterday. And yesterday I was able to talk about it really confidently. And I know that I know this, but I just can't produce it. Yeah. And then having those, as you rightly described, sort of more panic symptoms in the exam itself. It would usually, I would expect it to resolve shortly after the exam is over, although oftentimes, there is a bit of residual, oh my God, how could I stuff that up? Or, that's, oh no, I'm going to fail. And so there might be some residual effects, I suppose, after the exam itself. But it's very much a situation-based anxiety. It's not just a general free-floating anxiety that's there all the time.
Yeah. hopefully for listeners out there, people can relate to how it is quite situational and doesn't last forever, or it doesn't last the whole 24/7. Maybe sounds like, I can imagine, or I can relate to this, where when we think about it, then my heart races a little bit, I get a bit sweaty palms type of feeling. If I've got a deadline due, I've got a presentation, and that itself is that assessment anxiety.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And also I should add that it very often is perhaps stronger when you have to do a practical assessment where you maybe need to demonstrate a skill or give a speech, talk in front of a group. Somehow that adds another element, because there's a performative element to that where, you're being watched in the moment. And that can sometimes, some people might be fine with theory assessments or paper pen assessments or online exams, but find that they really struggle in that space of those more practical assessments where they have to perform in person in the moment.
What is it about that, and including timed assessments, that become more stressful for some of us?
Yeah. Look, I think it's the fact that it's time limited. We know that we've got huge amounts of information that we need to present in that assessment, and we need to we don't know what they're going to ask, and so we're studying a big broad range of stuff, and so it feels like probably they'll ask about 10% of what we're revising, but we still have to revise 100% of it. We have to gain all that knowledge and awareness before we go into the exam. I think it's also that feeling of being put on the spot, right now, like, someone's saying to me, or, the question's there on the screen, answer this question right now. It's not like I'm like, give me a minute, let me think about that.
Yeah.
let me just see if it comes to me. It's that sense of urgency, maybe.
True.
That's why I think they feel particularly stressful, maybe certainly more so than, say, an assignment, which, you can work on piecemeal, you gradually put it together. And then you finally, when you feel happy with it, you hand it in, sort of thing. With the exam, it's like, now, give me the answer now. So I think that's why they feel particularly stressful.
I can imagine staying up, like trying to cram everything in the hope that if they ask that question, I'm going to be able to answer that because I just crammed that in the night before.
Absolutely. I mean, gosh, I remember. I've been there too. I mean, I certainly remember like literally walking into the exam, like madly flicking through, and like virtually not reading it because I was so stressed I couldn't take it in, but there's this sort of illusion that, maybe this will be the one question that if I didn't happen to read this sentence before I walked in, I can't answer it. And it is hard because, you don't know what they're going to ask you specifically. And a semester's worth of work is a lot of information.
It is trying to like really showcase what we've learned, how we have managed to demonstrate that understanding, and in the time that we're given, which sometimes is not enough. And, sometimes we want to say a lot more, but we've got put on that spot, like you said, or put on the pressure. Some of us, you need to ponder over things and do things in draft or edit form.
Yeah. Exactly.
I know that we talk about, to our clients and our students, like, how we can feel good stress or bad stress, right? Are you able to tell us a little bit about what is this good stress, bad stress? Are there differences between the two?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think the thing about stress is that it's not completely evil. Some stress is needed to have a reason to do things. If we didn't have some pressure on us to get things done, I don't know, I think we're inherently pretty lazy, actually. Like, we probably wouldn't do it unless we had to, and so a bit of stress is okay. Like, it gives us that get up and go, like, a deadline's coming, I need to get that work done, I become productive, I do it, I work hard and I finish it and it's done. That's good stress, Good stress might even be feeling a bit of butterflies on the day of an assessment, but still being able to perform, still being able to function well, still being able to remember everything. Good stress in summary basically is that good stress motivates us to stay focused on study, and it maybe makes us ready for action, like we're prepared to go, ready to go. But when
it's energizing too,
it
sounds like, it energizes us to do things, to be able to have the capacity to do things. Yeah.
Exactly. That's a really perfect description. Yeah. But, of course, too much anxiety, too much stress, it starts to interfere with our preparation. It starts to interfere with our performance, and it feels pretty awful as well. Sometimes the range of symptoms that we can experience is pretty uncomfortable. We can have anything from what I mentioned, like the physical signs, like your pounding heart, having an upset stomach, maybe feeling dizzy, just terribly uncomfortable. It might be more of a behavioral thing, like feeling really restless or feeling like you're on a short fuse. Someone says something inconsequential to you and you snap at them as though they've said the worst thing in the world. The example I often give to my clients is, that you're too stressed when you're in the bad stress mode, when you go to the supermarket and you go to get your favourite toothpaste and it's out of stock and you burst into tears. And it's like, it's that thing of like, this emotion does not actually fit this situation.
True.
Why am I this upset about something so trivial?
Yeah.
Usually it's a bit of a sign that maybe, your stress is not in that optimum zone anymore. And yes, of course, it's not just crying. It might be being angry. It might be being irritable. It might be feeling a bit depressed. And then, in terms of your thinking style, you might find yourself being really mean to yourself, really self-critical. I'm useless. I can never do this. I always stuff up. But certainly, the one that makes it hard with assessments is that it interferes with our focus, concentration, our ability to sort of remember things, and that's really problematic for our performance.
Yeah, I guess with a lot of things in life where you describe with the good stress, we've got to have a bit of it, in moderation.
That's right.
But we also don't want to have too much of it. So a little bit like, with chocolate or food as my favorite topic, and I like to use that as a comparison to compare with, okay, too much of one thing. If you eat too much, that's no good. If you eat too little, that's probably no good either for like performance or just functioning. But if you eat moderate level, it gives us, somewhere in between, and it gives us energy to do things or motivation to do things, being able to focus or stay grounded. But if it's too much of one thing, then it becomes too excessive. And all we're doing is trying to control that or manage that or get a handle on that we're not really actually doing what we've been studying for, what we've been working on so far with our academic studies.
Yeah. And I think it feeds itself too. Like the more that you get into that bad stress mode, you start being stressed about the fact that you're stressed and that you're not coping very well. And then you get into this vicious cycle that it's really hard to get out of.
Right, yes. It's very circular. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
And then we might fall into a heap.
Right, exactly. And sometimes what that means is I don't show up to the exam, or I just don't do it, or I avoid, because that's a very human reaction to feeling overwhelmed or anxious, is to go into avoidance. And of course, that doesn't have a good long-term consequence for us either in terms of our performance with studying.
I know earlier on we talked about some symptoms, some signs, that we feel physically, cognitively, or even maybe some lifestyle changes. I just am curious also, like, what else can I look out for when I feel that assessment anxiety? We talked about the butterflies in the stomach. I know for myself, sometimes it's the performative side of things, like giving a speech or a presentation, the heart races, thinking about it. Sweaty palms or feeling hot. But are there more things that we need to look out for for me to know when I am actually feeling that anxious about that assessment?
Yeah. Look, I think these things will become very apparent very quickly because the one thing about those stress symptoms is that they're pretty in your face. Yeah, it's all the things that you mentioned, on the physical side. The common ones do tend to be around like racing heart, pounding heart palpitations. Sometimes chest pain can happen, and that can be really frightening because you think it's something else, not anxiety. And then often hits our gastrointestinal system as well. So it might be nausea, it might be diarrhea, or just like cramps or wind or anything in that sort of, a lot of people, like even with, say, something like irritable bowel syndrome, that's really influenced by stress, and you can often get a real flare up in symptoms with stress. And I think they're all kind of in the same sort of space, Might be really bad headaches, could be another one. Vision, sometimes people have vision, like things go a bit blurry. The range of things that can happen with stress is really quite big. It's quite a big thing, and sometimes it's things you wouldn't expect. Oh, is that caused by stress? One I know that I often can tell when I'm feeling stressed is grinding my teeth. And so, you might get a bit of jaw pain from that, or that can also cause a bit of dizziness. So, those sorts of things. Other behavioural signs I think to look out for is if you notice yourself avoiding, like if you notice yourself procrastinating, when you think about, oh dear, this assessment's coming up. I could either study or I could watch TV. I'm watching TV. Oh no, and now I'm getting more stressed because I'm not getting any of my work done. Those are an indication that maybe your stress is burning a bit high, And then, I mentioned before about the emotional stuff, perhaps the crying, the feeling angry, the being irritable, snapping at people. You might notice just things annoy you much more than they used to.
Being less patient.
Less patient, exactly.
No, we're not as patient, whether it's lining up for something, whether it's someone cutting us off somewhere at a queue, or often that can happen as well if we're quite sensitive. We're a bit irritable or agitated, and it's completely unrelated to that matter. Like it's someone cuts you off, okay, it's out of proproportion, disproportionate to the actual event, like you said with the toothpaste situation.
Exactly.
Or you just have a tantrum in the middle of a supermarket.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think people feel overwhelmed as well. It's just that feeling of overwhelm. Like it's too much for me to deal with. Like I have to travel this far, but I only have this much in my petrol tank. It's like it's too much. It all feels too much.
Right. Yeah. It's getting too big and I can't, handle it, or that's the sensation, or that's the feeling. And that's sometimes also the thought, I can't handle this.
I can't handle it. Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm sure our listeners are also very keen to hear, but how do I develop skills to prepare for assessment anxiety? I mean, especially when I, might have felt like this in the past, and maybe some of us have had successful ways of dealing with it or not so successful way, regardless. But what would be your tips?
Yeah, look, I think that the first thing I'd like to tell listeners is to remember that what exams actually measure or timed assessments actually measure is not how good you are or how talented you are or how smart you are. What they actually measure is how good a job have you done of revising for this? How much practice have you had in answering these sorts of similar questions? How good are you at managing your time in exams? Not spending 20 minutes on one question that's worth 2 marks and then not having time to finish it. And then your ability to address the questions. In other words, really what I want to say about that is the things that lead to success in exams are actually things that you can work on, even if feeling anxious. Exams, if you get a good technique going, you will navigate them much better. And so that, I think I'd start there. I would definitely start with, okay, what's my revision technique? How am I preparing for this? Am I covering the breadth of what I need to know? Sometimes you can get bogged down in depth. I'm going to really drill down on this one topic. And then, oh no, I haven't covered any of the others. And my advice is usually, a moderate level of depth on all of them, because then statistically speaking, you've got a much better chance of being able to answer all the questions, even if you don't get all the minute detailing. So get onto the online learning lab at RMIT, for example, which has some tutorials on how to revise for an exam, how to use active revision skills, for example. The mistake a lot of people make in revising for exams is just reading over things over and over again, but that's like a real form of passive learning. And it doesn't transfer into our long-term memory. And so we need to kind of use some better tricks to get it to transfer. I'll give you my tips that worked for me as just an example of things you can do in this revision space. I used to create a list of questions for every lecture that I was revising. So it was almost like, here's the information, what's the question that matches with that information? And I put it on a sheet of paper next to me.
That's great.
I would then test myself on these questions, but I wouldn't write the answers because that takes a really long time. Your hand cramps up, and actually it doesn't involve more than one modality. So what I would do is I would take my list of questions and I would walk around the house and I would answer them out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And so by speaking them out loud, it engages another modality of expression, and that can really help with the making that transfer into long-term memory. If I couldn't think of the answer, I'd go back and I'd refer to the material again, remind myself of it, then I'd step away and I'd practice answering. And I would do that multiple times in the lead up to the day. That's a really good way to sort of get that breadth of coverage and using more active revision strategies. Other things that people can do, say with a subject like anatomy, where you're having to learn a huge amount of information and sometimes words that are not words that we typically use in day-to-day conversation, is maybe if you get like a picture of the organ, say, and you know how they often have those little like lines saying, you know, this is the whatever and this is the whatever.
That's right.
Wipe them out, like photocopy it, wipe them out, and then photocopy it a bunch of times, and then practice writing in the answers, right? So you get your recall. So doing that sort of testing of yourself, flashcards is another way to do it. Working in a study group would be another way to do it. These are all ways, more active revision strategies that will help that transfer into long-term memory. We've got much more space in our long-term memory than we do in our short-term memory. So we want to make that transfer. So that's what I would sort of say with the revision space. Try not to cram. That's going to definitely sort of feed into your anxiety. Look, I know easier said than done. I was definitely a crammer, I have to say. But
I think we all would have done that.
Look, I think we've all done it. And like, you know, it's not necessarily a terrible thing if you're cramming. Like, don't think, oh my God, I'm a failure because I've ended up having to cram for this assessment. It's a little bit part and parcel of student life, isn't it, that you may end up doing that. But, you know, if you can sort of reduce the amount of cramming you need to do, that's going to be helpful. Yeah, you know, building on those study skills. I mentioned the online learning lab through the RMIT website is something you could do, joining a study group. Usually the lecturers will give you a bit of a clue about what the areas are going to be on the exam and the type of questions, like is it going to be a multiple choice question or is it going to be a short answer or a long answer question? And they should, if they're a good teacher, give you an idea of what sort of things they're looking for. So try to practice answering those kinds of questions. Maybe see if you can source some old exam papers that you can practice with. Yeah, all of those sorts of things are great for that sort of like revision side of things.
Absolutely. I understand that some of the lecturers, I think during, you know, weeks 11 or 12 in the very last week, sometimes we'll have, you know, the class is actually focused on upcoming assessments and they encourage students to actually attend because that would be, you know, quite the theme of that class. And there are sometimes it's not recorded. And so, you know, they want people to be able to go so they can contribute and work in groups, like you said, and have that, like you said, also active participation to be able to revise. But you're doing it live, you're doing it with a group of people or your group mates or classmates. So they're all sort of, then you get an idea of people who know the material or learn from each other as well if you're not as familiar.
Absolutely. I mean, the great thing about study groups is that sometimes you will know more about something or remember more about something and you can teach it to the others. The act of teaching information to somebody else is a great revision strategy.
Yes, that's right.
Other times it'll be like, oh my gosh, I don't remember covering that at all. And the other person teaches you, but you get benefit from being taught by them as well. So it's really a win-win whether you're teaching or whether you're absorbing and learning from them. You're either way really contributing to your revision practice.
And I know like the advantage of also being in a study group is sometimes you allocate, you know, like if you started the semester, if you have a study group that you are a part of and you can allocate each other, like say a chapter for if you've got mandated readings or the actual required reading, people allocate certain chapters to each other and then you can actually provide deliver a summary of that chapter you've read, and that is your revision too, because you're, like you said before, you're delivering material you've read and then you were able to summarize that to share with your group. It's almost teaching that to the group.
Yes, it is, exactly. And that's a way of sort of, you know, if you have a schedule of meetings throughout the semester, that's a way of like keeping on top of it and not leaving it all to the last minute as well. And sometimes you're a little bit, you know, more willing to Well, you stick to your intentions when you have to meet up with other people, right? It's when you say,
True.
I'm like this with the gym sometimes. Yeah, I'm going to go to the gym. Oh, no, I don't feel like it. I think I won't go.
Yeah.
But if I know I'm
Yeah.
meeting someone at the gym,
That's
I
right.
know I have to go because they'll be waiting for me. So, that
Yeah.
just give me that little extra push that I need to get over the line. So that's where a study group
Sometimes we're
can.
keen to keep the social commitment more than we
Yeah.
are to ourselves.
Correct. And also, as you said, you feel less alone because everyone's in it with
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
They're all dealing with the same feelings you are, and it's just sometimes it's just a relief to be around people who understand how you're feeling.
It certainly can normalize that
Yeah,
anxiety and
yeah,
stress. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
But also kind of keep things in proportion as well, knowing,
yeah.
okay, this is good stress that I can utilize and I
That's it.
can actually treat it as good stress to kind of perform or to motivate me or to energize me to do some work.
Exactly. Yeah.
Beyond
So
these skills,
yeah,
what
yeah,
other things can I do to optimize, speaking of performance, but what can I
yeah,
do that, could optimize my performance and preparation for
yeah.
assessments or deadlines in general?
Yeah. So look, there's a couple of things just in terms of keeping study sessions productive would be one. It's things like I've already mentioned. Maybe writing it down in your own words or like writing the questions, like I mentioned.
Mm.
Maybe charts, pictures, mind maps. Some people find that a fantastic tool
Yeah.
if you're a
Color
visual
code
learner.
stuff.
Color
Yeah.
coding stuff, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Memory can be really assisted by things like maybe developing an acronym for what it is that you need to remember. Like if there's, 5 stages of something and what's the letter of the first word of each of those stages, and make that into a word and then remember that word. And then that helps you to then recall what the actual 5 stages are. Certainly breaking down the information into smaller chunks when you're sort of trying to memorize it and learn it. Speaking it aloud, as I said, again, that introduces another modality, which is great. The big thing, obviously, is distraction too, like when you're trying to study. So you might need to use like a bit of a blocker. There's lots of apps that can block distracting websites like social media websites and things that can become a real time drain when you're trying to study. And maybe you just want to temporarily deactivate those things or block yourself from using those during your study sessions. And look, give yourself little rewards when you stay on task. Just like don't say I'm going to study for 8 hours at a time. Like that's going to feel like a real drudge. Break it up. Maybe go out and have lunch with a friend in the middle, and then come back. Have something you really like to eat, or go outside and sit in the sun, or something to reward yourself when you've been on task.
So it's almost like scheduling a day that's kind of like I was thinking when you described this, treated like a work day almost.
Yes.
For those of us who've kind of work shifts as well, then it's like do a morning shift, and in your morning shift you might have a breakdown of the different types of tasks that you've got to do. Like if you're at work, say for example, go into your job at the start of your shift, and often you're told, okay, here are the tasks that you need to be done by the end of your shift or by lunchtime, for example, and then you set out to do them however you organize it. And it sounds like, with the study day or like that kind of study session, maybe trying to break that into chunks like that so that it's a little bit more doable and realistic.
Yeah. And I find sometimes different for everyone. That's why I say I find. But when I was doing it, if I stayed on the one subject for too long, I found I started to go into this sort of drifting off and losing interest, but getting just a bit fatigued with it.
Yes.
And so it can keep you fresh to do like a shift on this subject, and then a shift in the afternoon on this subject, and depending on when your exams are and so on, obviously you have to that's also based on that sort of thing, what you decide to study when. But I really like that idea of like, what in this shift that I'm doing, this study shift, what will I cover? Maybe make a plan beforehand and actually cross things off as you go. It's incredibly therapeutic to cross things out. I used to use a red pen so that I could see like the increasing red going down the page of like, I'm getting closer and closer to finishing my long list of tasks. That can actually be quite motivating to see the progress that you're making. Yeah. So, we've sort of mentioned some things about, doing lots of practice and revision. But other things that I think are important is stuff around the space of just good general health. So it might be things like making sure you keep a healthy lifestyle, having a good sleep routine, eating as well as you can. You know, we know that with preparing for exams, you know, we might be pulling all-nighters, we might be eating a lot of junk food, we might be consuming a lot of caffeine. You know, unfortunately, caffeine is going to contribute to anxiety because it's a stimulant, and anxiety is a kind of stimulant. So when you add a stimulant to a stimulant, you get lots of stimulation, and sometimes too much stimulation. So that's another thing to be aware of, to sort of think about, okay, how can I make sure that I'm eating a little bit healthier? Again, don't make it a hard thing like, oh my God, suddenly I have to totally change my diet. And no, because that's just going to make me feel more stressed. It might just be having some general guidelines, like I'm going to have more of the fresh stuff, fresh fruit, fresh vegetables. You know, maybe I'm going to prepare some home cooked meals and freeze them when it's, you know, in the not so busy period, so that when I'm in the busy period, I can eat something that's like a home cooked meal that's, you know, a bit more nourishing. Or if I am going to go out and do takeaway, like why don't I pick the sort of takeaway that's maybe got some veggies in it? So, you know, not McDonald's so much, maybe a stir fry or something like that that's got lots of good fresh veggies in it. Is going to be a better choice, you know. So that sort of thing, and you know, there's nothing wrong with having a bit of chocolate or something like that to reward yourself, but maybe just again, like what you said earlier, moderation, keep it in moderation.
I was going to say maybe chocolate or a soft drink. I find it's more, maybe that's a treat at the end of the day, a dessert. That can be, you know, after dinner. You know, that's just a treat, and I have a treat every day. But so be it. You know, it's like once I finish studying, that's it. You know, I can clean up my room, and then I can kind of go on holidays or do whatever else, hang out with friends. But in the moment and gearing up for things to be very busy or stressful and or anxiety provoking, it's like, okay, but I might need something for the moment that's a bit comforting. So I might just have a chocolate bar. And that's a reward to look forward to as well.
It is exactly. So that's why I never say, oh, cut all that stuff out, like become a vegan, like you know, yes, that's a very healthy lifestyle if you can maintain it, but if the thought of doing that is incredibly stressful, then I wouldn't, you know. I would just maybe add more of the good stuff, you know. Even things like with caffeine, for example, like a lot of people say, oh God, no, I couldn't do it if I didn't have, you know, 5 or 6 coffees in the day. Maybe just try switching out a couple of them, you know, with a herbal tea, you know, with a chamomile tea or something like that. You know, I once had a student friend of mine who she never drank caffeine to keep herself awake. She said what kept her awake was drinking lots of water, because when she drank lots of water, she needed to go to the bathroom a lot. And so that kept her awake, because you can't sleep when you need to go to the bathroom. And I thought that's actually a very good point. If I stay really hydrated, which is a really good thing, that will actually probably keep me more awake.
Very true. I've tried that. It is very distracting though, because every half hour or so
I know you have to go to, I know.
Yep. I mean, although that probably works well if you're on a Pomodoro technique, which is, you know, you time your study time and then you can get up and have a break. It works well if you time it that way. But otherwise it is very distracting.
Yeah, you can set your time around your bladder function.
That's right.
I like it.
But I like also the thought of, even sometimes, look, if I pair something I ate today that's a bit more, let's say, junk food or unhealthy, maybe I'll pair it with something else that's a little bit more healthy for dinner, for example. Maybe it can be a little bit more balanced that way.
That's right.
Especially these days with supermarkets, where they sell a lot of pre-packed fresh stuff, like salads or fruits or cut up fruits. Have some in the fridge that you can just go and, you know, have the chocolate, but also have, you know, packets of like cut up fruits or sliced up veggies that you can just pick out of the fridge at the same time.
And that's such a good idea. And really, supermarkets are making it easier and easier for us to not have to do so much prep. If we can just grab those things and you know, we can probably have that stuff ready to go. It's even portable, you know, we can take it with us, and it's just adding some good stuff to what we're eating. Is a good idea. And the other thing is, I think, exercise. And so, again, I'm not talking about vigorous sessions at the gym where you're almost vomiting from the exertion. Like, it doesn't have to be that level of exercise. I'm just talking about a nice, simple, gentle walk, maybe a 30-minute walk per day in the lead up to exams. We know that there's a really strong link between sort of mental wellness and exercise and stress. So it's a great stress management technique, and it allows you to practice a bit of mindfulness too. You know, observing the world around you. This time of year, we're coming into spring. You know, there's some nice blossom fragrances in the air. The temperatures are getting a bit warmer. You know, maybe some other flowers are coming out. There's different colours in the landscape. You know, just pay attention to all of that stuff as you're walking around. That's also going to be really great for your well-being. You know, make sure you do eat regularly as well. So think about those 3 times a day. Like, you've got to refuel. You know, some people, when they get very, very stressed, they can't eat. And so that's something to maybe pay attention to. Like, oh gosh, if I've gone a whole day without eating, I'm not giving my brain any food, and that's going to make it harder to study. So
that makes sense. We do, you know, we do burn fuel as we're sitting and studying, because it is a stimulating activity, even though we're just sort of quite sedentary and we're just sitting around, but we are actually engaging in our brain, and it does need, actually, you know, stuff. It needs petrol.
It does.
And so we do need to actually fill up sometimes, and we do tend to forget as well. Some of us forget, some of us are too stressed, or the butterflies are too much, and so it's hard to actually feel. I don't feel like I have an appetite, but it's easy to go for the junk food, where it is quite comforting at the same time.
Exactly. And look, maybe you want to just, if you really feel unwell and like, I can't eat, you know, maybe it is just like grazing. You know, maybe it's not the 3 meals a day, but it's just like having things on hand to graze, nuts and fruits and veggies and things like that you can just graze on, so you're at least still giving your body the nutrition that it needs without necessarily having a big meal that might make you feel a bit unwell.
And that sounds similar to like drinking water all the time. Like, you know, you can actually stay awake if you're grazing a bit more.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Exactly. Good point. Yeah. So those are some good things. And the final one that I just want to mention is thinking about sleep. So again, sleep gets very affected by stress, and some ways that you can look at improving your sleep or developing what we psychologists call good sleep hygiene is to not necessarily go to bed at the same time every day, but what I would advocate is trying to wake up at the same time every day, because that does tend to force us into a better sleep-wake sort of cycle. And get used to paying attention to what I'd call, or what many people call, the sleep wave, which is that really sleepy feeling that kind of comes over you. If you go to bed on a sleep wave, on a sleepy feeling, you're much more likely to fall asleep. And so rather than going, I'm going to go to bed at 11 p.m., maybe say around that time, I'm going to make preparation for bed. I'm going to wind down. I'm going to turn, you know, off the stimulation. I'm going to put the blue light devices away. You know, maybe I'm going to have a nice calming drink like a chamomile tea. Maybe I'm just going to lower the lights and just do a bit of quiet reading or listening to music to wind down for bed. And when I feel that wave come over me, that's when I'm going to hop into bed. And we want to be aiming for 8 hours a night. You know, some people say, I only need 4 hours sleep. And like, maybe that's true, but really we know the human body in general, for good functioning, needs 8 hours of sleep a night.
Yeah. We know we go through sleep cycles during the night. So, you know, that's been kind of researched as the optimal. You know, the 8 hours gives us a certain number of cycles that the body needs. I can imagine also, briefly, I understand that the sleep cycle, it's also about consolidating what we've read, what we've learned, what we've revised during the day. And that's also why sleep has been really researched as so important. If we're trying to remember things, if you're going to sit an exam the next day or a test, you do want a good night's sleep. There's been lots of studies that advocate for that reason. It helps you kind of put all those things into more of a long-term memory rather than the cramming. Even though there's a part of us, and I do often say this to clients, is that especially come assessment time, there's an acceptance to the stress level. You're going to get anxious, you're going to get stressed out, you're going to get overwhelmed. You are probably going to be sleep deprived more than other times in the year. And it might help to anticipate and then prepare for, look, even if you're going to be sleep deprived, don't make yourself too sleep deprived. So maybe somewhere in the middle, so that it's not too extreme or excessive. But certainly with the sleep, like you said, with the regular waking, hopefully that'll help people to wind down at night, because you will get a little bit sleepier. And it's like that surfing. You got to go out and catch a good wave.
You do.
You wait for it. You don't just go there when there are no waves.
Yeah, exactly right.
Nothing's going to work.
Just because it's 11 p.m.
That's right.
If there's no waves, there's no point. Exactly.
Have we missed anything so far before I get
Oh,
on to
look,
the
the
next
only the only other thing that I would maybe mention is maybe just utilizing some psychological strategies as well. For example, maybe visualizing success. Maybe that's something you can do as you're trying to drift off to sleep at night. Instead of picturing yourself walking into the exam, having a freak out and becoming completely overwhelmed, picture yourself walking in, sitting down, or probably these days it's a lot of online assessments, turning on the computer, looking at the questions, going, oh, I know the answers to those questions, and then picture yourself feeling relieved and happy walking out of the exam room or submitting your online assessment and going, job well done, I think I did okay. So just picture that, like create it like a little movie in your mind and just watch that repeatedly. That's much more likely to, then become, we talk about like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you constantly visualize something positive, there's a greater chance that it will sort of come to fruition. The other thing that's super important, I think, is in the psychological strategy space is some deep relaxation. And so many people, I'm sure, have heard of mindfulness and deep breathing, deep abdominal breathing. Those are some great things to do. There's heaps of things online. There's heaps of apps like Headspace or Smiling Mind, or one that I like to use, which is called One Giant Mind, also an Australian app. It's the number one and then Giant Mind. And if you do that daily in the lead up to your exams, maybe starting 2-3 weeks out from the exam, you start to create a bit of a habit around calming your body down. So relaxation works because it sort of stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, which has a dampening effect on the sympathetic nervous system, which is the one that gets all revved up when we're stressed. And so we know it's an immediate antidote to stress. And if you can get good at it, then you can produce it when you need to. Like, I'm feeling really stressed in the exam right now. I've just seen a question I don't know the answer to. I'm just going to close my eyes and I'm going to do 3 or 4 breaths and just bring that down, bring that overstimulation down. So doing the practice in the lead up will help you cope with that lead up anxiety that we talked about, but also you can then pull it out when you need to in the exam, if you need to do a bit of breathing. And just notice your thought patterns. Notice if you're being really negative, saying, oh, I can't do this, I'm bound to fail, well, nothing's going to help me, I'm obviously stupid, I have to do well or it's the end of the world. If you find yourself saying things like that, those are self-defeating thoughts. Try to think about some empowering thoughts. Maybe you need to write them down for yourself because they can be harder to come up with. Negative thoughts come to us, no problems. Positive thoughts are a little bit harder. But, maybe things like, I'm just going to do my best and that's all I can do. I can learn from this if I make a mistake. Mistakes are actually valuable. I'll do better next time. I've done all the preparation and I've done everything I can. Even if I don't do well, it's just one assessment that, in a few years' time will be completely forgotten. I'm smart enough to do well. It's saying those things to yourself, giving yourself some empowerment rather than some, the self-defeating thoughts.
Yeah, I like also with the affirmations, sometimes writing that and having, I know, in perhaps pop psychology, self-help sections of the bookstores or even stationery shops these days, you can get affirmation cards. I imagine, they've been popular for a reason. So having them around, we see it visually, and that's really encouraging. And you're not, if you're ever stuck, you don't have to think of what to write or what to say, but some of these really help. It's an aid, and it can help us generate some of the affirming feelings within the work that we do and the efforts that we've put in so far.
Absolutely. I mean, you could even do something like, if you haven't got time to go and get some of those sorts of cards, just jump online and just type in inspiring quotes about study, and you will probably find a whole heap of things come up, and you can pick the ones that you like and print them out and stick them up on your wall and just, look at them regularly. It sounds super daggy and a bit pop psychology, but actually it does really help. And the more that you look over those things and read over those things, the more it starts to embed itself into your psyche.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that I notice that has been really helpful with clients who have tried to use it. Even, myself being skeptical at first about it, but it is helpful seeing it visually, because it is giving ourselves a different perspective of how like that inner critic or the critical voice saying you can't do it, or the marks that you got last time is not going to help this time, or or even the shoulds and the musts, you must do better than last semester. But it really helps to kind of balance and just to give a different perspective, the affirmative thoughts.
It does. Yeah.
So I'm also thinking about, like, on the day of the assessments, are there practical things to actually think about for the day of that assessment? Like if I'm thinking time to tests or exams, or especially, and even nowadays, if we have to do it online, are there some considerations for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question. I mean, I think when it comes to an in-person exam, for example, it might be, particularly practical exams are usually in person. I would ensure that you know everything about where it is, where's the room, what time is it, how long will it take me to get there, how am I going to get there, is there parking available, what's the train timetable or tram timetable, what time do I
maybe
roughly need to
reread
leave?
some of those things a couple of times.
Make sure you've got what you need with you. If you need to bring some items with you, the classic things might be pens, pencil, eraser, sharpener, whatever, maybe a watch, calculator. Make sure you've got those things. Pack them well in advance so that they're ready to go with you. Maybe check up what the exam rules and regulations are. Have all that stuff ready to go. Anything that will cut down your stress on the day, if you can do that prep beforehand, is going to help you.
Yep.
With an online exam, because you might be doing that maybe at home, I think what I would do with that one is just to, again, check what are the specific requirements of this assessment. Is it one that I have to do at 3:00 on a Monday afternoon? Or is it one that, any time between Monday and Friday of that week I can do it, but once I start it, I have to submit it, kind of thing. So find out, can I do it at home, or do I need to be on campus on a computer lab to do it or something? Make sure your computer's functioning, give it a little test run and so on. Just check that it's got all the hardware.
Have backup internet.
Have backup internet. Think about troubleshooting. Like if my internet, my home internet drops out, can I tether to my phone, for example, or something like that? Find a spot that has the least amount of distractions for you. Tell the people that you live with. Maybe you need to stick a sign on the door, I'm doing an exam, do not enter, so that you have no distractions or interruptions. And then think about an optimal time for you to do the exam. If you get to choose, like if it's, any time within a certain window, maybe choose the time of day that works best for you. I had a student, I remember, who always functioned better in the mornings, because if she did anything in the afternoon, she built up her anxiety so much by that point in the day that she got to the overblown, the overstressed sort of stage. So she definitely coped better if she did it first thing in the morning. Others of you might hear that and go, oh God, no, I'm terrible in the morning. It'd be better if I did it at night. So just know yourself and pick. There isn't a right time. It's what's the right time for you. And then again, like with online exams, it might be more of an open book style exam. So make sure you've got all the materials that you need ready to go, easy to access.
Some tabs help, having highlighted tabs. Yeah,
that's it.
Those post-its
help.
it.
Yeah. Post-its are perfect. Maybe dividers, folder dividers.
Yeah.
Just, think about how am I going to lay out this information so I can easily put my fingers on it during the exam. If you're needing to look things up during the exam, don't do it in the same window as the exam. Open up another tab or a different browser. So it's just thinking about things like that. So, that's sort of practical prep. Any of that you can do, as I mentioned before, before the day is just going to take another burden off your shoulders.
True.
So that things go more smoothly on the day. And really, with anything that can reduce the stress overall, just take it down a notch, take the temperature down a notch, will mean that you're more likely to stay in that optimum zone and not go into that overblown, overstressed, overwhelmed zone.
But say if I do feel the anxiety and stress during this exam or the timed assessment, what if I do feel that way, and what can I do in that moment?
Yeah, great question. Another great question. Yeah, look, I think the first thing that I would suggest is the breathing. I mentioned before about the deep abdominal breathing. I know it can feel like, because it's timed, oh my God, I've got to keep going, but actually take the time to stop and breathe. Just close your eyes and just do maybe 4 or 5 breaths. Focus on releasing the muscles in your shoulder and neck, maybe unclenching your jaw. That feeling of letting, if you notice you're squeezing any of your muscles, unsqueeze, just breathe and do that, 4 or 5 times. And you can do that as many times as you need to. That'd be my first tip if it happens in the exam. Don't get into the stress spiral. Oh my God, I don't know the answer to that question. Oh no, I'm going to fail. No, this is terrible. And then stick with that question. Move on to the next question. So I'm going to come back to that. It might come back to me. The more questions that you can answer, the more likely you'll pass the exam. So don't get bogged down on one question that you can't answer. maybe even sometimes what I used to do is just jot down how long I was going to spend on each question, and it might be based on how many marks it's worth. And then you can kind of keep an eye on, am I on track with my timings, with the answer I need to provide. If it's a more long form answer question that's required, maybe do a little dot point plan first, and you can include the dot point plan in your answer. If you then run out of time to actually complete the answer, the examiner has your dot point plan, and you can actually get marks out of that. You know,
Very
you might
true.
not get the full marks, but you might pick up 1 or 2 extra, 1 or 2 marks.
Yep. Anything helps.
Anything helps, right? Ideally, if you can leave a bit of time to go over your exam paper at the end is good. Don't leave early. Use the time
use
that's
the
allotted.
time. That's
use
right.
it, go over it, check over it. And the other thing I would say is don't have post-mortems. I think that's the one thing that's maybe good about not having an in-person exam, because I do remember with in-person exams, people would come out and they'd be like, oh, my God, well, that was really hard. Like, what did you think of question 6? I wrote this. What did you write?
Yes.
And you go, oh, my God, I didn't write that. That must be wrong. And then you can find yourself getting really upset and you don't actually know whether they got it right or you got it right. Maybe just pop your headphones on and just vamoose out of there as quickly as you can.
Yeah.
Maybe put a little embargo on contact after the exam, turn off your phone, go and watch a TV show or go for a walk or something where people can't contact you for a bit. Don't get into the postmortems because you're just going to stress yourself out, and it's done by then. You can't do anything about it, so there's no point.
That's right. I like to remove the material. So any of that revision material, just put it away for now. You clean it up later, but remove it, and then you can like go and do something else. So it's like out of sight, out of mind for the time being.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, the other thing that's just occurred to me that I was going to mention about online exams is if you hit technical snags. So if that happens, try to maybe screenshot your work and paste it into a Word document or something. You might be able to email it to the lecturer. If you go to get to the end and you try and hit submit and it won't submit, if you've kept a record of your answers and you can send that to your your lecturer, then that might actually save you. So that's another good tip that I forgot to mention that's maybe worth considering with the online assessments.
Yeah, that is a great tip. We know that, they do take that into consideration. And, you shouldn't be penalised if you hit like an internet snag or something like that.
Exactly right.
But they do need some evidence. So otherwise everyone could try and do that as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Understandably.
Exactly, yeah. And just a couple of other hacks, because gosh, Yvonne, I do talk a lot, don't I?
No, that's okay. I was like, I really hope we've kind of covered
everything.
Like, please feel free to share.
Yeah, I just things keep popping into my brain.
Right.
I was also thinking about some other things you can do in the moment of the exams. We were talking about that a moment ago. I've mentioned the breathing, but some other things that you might also try is like having a stretch, like just doing some basic stretches, your neck, stand up, move around, sort of things, sit back down. Maybe have like a mantra that you can repeat to yourself, like saying the word calm, and repeating that to yourself can sometimes help bring down that overstimulation. Maybe visualize a peaceful place that you've either been to or you'd like to go to.
I was going to ask about that. Visualization. That's going to give us more, make us grounded.
Yes, exactly. Maybe you've got like a snap from a holiday that you went on and this amazing view or something. Like have it with you, have it nearby, and look at it and just try and picture yourself being in that place and time again. The other thing you can also try is a bit of like some focusing techniques, just to get your brain to switch back on. So it might be things like count the number of desks in the room or count the number of pink things in your room that you're in. Just go do a little mental, like look around the room going, okay, the carpet is this colour, the walls are this colour, there's this book on the shelf, and like really look around you and observe your environment and just, observe that to yourself. It might be like sharpening pencils, or you could even think about lyrics to songs, repeating lyrics to songs, or what are the capital cities of all the countries in Europe, and just like recite them. So these like little focusing activities could just get your brain to switch back on when you hit that, like I've gone completely blank, I can't think of anything.
Right.
So that can be a good little one to try.
I know I fiddle with the pen. We often fiddle. So even if it's online stuff or you're typing something, having the writing material next to you. Absolutely. And I fiddle with the pen or fidget with the pen, because there's this restlessness or nervous energy, and it just helps to kind of release a little bit of it.
It does, it does. And there's heaps of fidget toys now, because kids love
Yeah.
them. And there's all those ones that are like they're like bubble wrap thing where you can but it's like a rubber bubble wrap thing, and you can pop the bubbles in and out. And, they like come on a little panel of like, I don't know, 20 of these little bubbles, and I forgot what they're called. There's a
I was
name for
going
them.
to ask about bubble wrap.
Yeah,
Popping bubble wrap is
popping
fun,
bubble
but
wrap,
it's disposable though, as in you do it once and
Yeah.
then that's it. Yeah.
and then it's done. Whereas these little rubber things, you can just, once you pop it on one side, you can flip it over and then pop it on the other. So it's eternally replenishing itself.
Yeah. Oh, that's very satisfying.
Yeah, it is very satisfying. It is. There's ones that make clicky sounds, and there's sounds and sensations and so on. So yeah, even like those $2 shops have heaps of that sort of stuff. So go and have a look and see if you can find a couple of fidget things. Have them to hand. Bring them with you.
Yes.
And the other thing that I would say is what I refer to as a bridging object, which is something that is maybe has a positive association in your life. Maybe it's a piece of jewelry, or it might be a picture, a book, something that when you pick it up, it reminds you, it evokes a really positive feeling about something wonderful that happened to you in your life, or a wonderful person, and it can instantly help you feel a little bit calmer, to connect you to that moment. So even if it's an in-person exam, particularly if it's a wearable something, wear it, touch it during the exam. If you start to feel really anxious, touch it, feel it, connect to that positive feeling.
Relatable. It's really relatable, because I talk about, I guess, in a very different way, but about confidence.
Yeah.
And it's actually about, maybe there's an outfit that you wear that can help you, feel more confident. Whereas this one is maybe there's something that you can have with you, whether it's an outfit or something, a jewelry or something that you wear on your person, and that feels comforting. And it gives you comfort, or brings you, like, calms you down.
Exactly. Yeah, it could be something tactile too, like a really soft scarf,
They're great.
It's that sort of thing, something that's a texture that you really like, and like if it's something like a ring, I happen to love rings, you can spin them. You can spin them on your fingers. So there's a wearable fidget toy.
Yep.
So that's something you can do.
And it's not noticeable.
And it's not
no
noticeable.
one notices it. Yep.
No, exactly.
And so what would be your message to our listeners out there following our episode today on managing assessment anxiety?
Yeah, I think my final message would be get to know yourself. What are your blind spots? What are your things that you particularly struggle with? When do you study the best? What are your strengths? So not just, what's bad, but also what's good about you, and come up with a plan of like, I've listened to this episode today and a couple of things have really resonated for me. I'm going to try those things out. Make a plan to try those things out. You don't have to do everything we've said today, because the point is that different things work for different people.
Yeah.
But you might go, oh, I really like the sound of those, bubble wrap things. I'm going to go and have a look at that. And, I'm going to try and focus on my sleep and my eating. And, that might be what your takeaway is from this episode. And for others, it might be a little bit more about practical revision strategies, but that's what you incorporate into your plan. And by knowing yourself, like, when am I at my sharpest mentally? When do I tend to get most anxious? What's the best study method for me? What kind of learner am I? All of those things are going to really help you come up with your own personalized exam plan.
Yeah. And it starts with observing us, isn't it? Observing ourselves or our behavior, or if I'm thinking about earlier on at the first part of our conversation, we're talking about like certain signals or symptoms or signs that tell us when we're anxious, just being able to observe when that occurs. And then we can make, is there a relationship between, is it the timed assessment that I get anxious about, that I get the butterflies, or is it about presentation that I get the butterflies? And we start to be a bit more observant of what's going on within us. And then we get a better handle on that if we start to know ourselves a little bit better.
100%, yeah, because you can't know what the problem is until you know what the problem is. You know what I mean? How do you fix the problem until you know what it is the things. So get your observational eyes on and just check in with yourself. Maybe reflect back on previous experiences of where your sticky spots were, when things didn't go so well, what was it? And then think about, what are some strategies I could try to overcome that next time?
Yeah. It is a bit trial and error, because, horses for courses, I think that's the saying goes. And you might try this and it works for you, and your classmates or friends might try something else and it works for them. And that's okay,
right.
and this is coming together with sometimes that study group to share what works, what other people have tried, what worked, and to give it a go. and to actually persist with it a little bit as well. I find that not just try it for 5 minutes, but maybe give it a few goes, and then you can really know whether that suits you or not. Like, for example, visualization works for a lot of people. Sometimes mindfulness works for other people, but not for everyone.
Exactly. So just let go of the idea that there's one right way. Also, what you said before, accept the idea that it's going to be uncomfortable. You won't eliminate stress completely, and nor should you. Find ways to sort of make it tolerable, you know, and hang
it's almost
in there
like capitalizing on that stress, because we know that time is going to be stressful. It's going to cause me anxiety, and I'm going to try and somehow use that anxiety to give me that energy to see me through. And then I can come out the other side, whatever the reward might be as well. With the studying, it's like, okay, if I give myself that reward, whether it's a piece of chocolate at the end of the day, a dessert or a drink, but then at the end of the whole assessment period, we can kind of actually celebrate fully, and more so whether it's hanging out with friends, you know, or going away, holidays, etc. So we get to actually really kind of finish off that by rewarding ourselves and feeling good about that coming out the other end.
Absolutely.
I hope our listeners will get to play back some of the relevant bits for them, because, you know, hopefully that helps them to reflect on it, write down, you know, what would be helpful, try it a few times, and then kind of listen again and work out, you know, what else they would like to try. I also just want to, you know, spruik out there that Liz also runs this as a webinar for RMIT students. So certainly be sure to check out the date for this on the RMIT Counselling website. I think you've got one coming up, I believe, sometime next month.
October.
Great. And I also will provide the link to, I believe it's the list of webinars that we're actually running for the remainder of the year in the episode description. So for listeners, if you haven't checked it out, have a look at the link. So this should be up to date. But I really appreciate your time, Liz, and I really thank you for all the wisdom that you've shared with us today. I'm sure I've taken a lot of things away from this, and I hope our listeners have as well.
Yeah, wonderful talking with you, Yvonne, and sharing with all the listeners. Yeah, it's great.
Thanks again, Liz.
My pleasure.
Thanks for joining us today on the Counselling Armchair. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and learned a useful thing or two. Have a great week, and just remember that life can be amazing. See you next time.
Isn't life so amazing? Sometimes it can get crazy, but hey, that's okay. We've got another day to make mistakes and say sorry. There's no sense in our worry, 'cause all we can do is try our best to make it through with love.